And hey everyone, this is Chris, MTGO's Rec Start, and I'm back for part 2 in today's special on spot removal in the Legacy Tribal Wars format. And as alluded to in part 1, I'm going to briefly explain the Patrick Chapin Muldrifter Baneslayer theory, which is basically that your deck should be entirely Muldrifters or entirely Baneslayers. In other words, if your deck is all creatures that get value just by coming into the battlefield, then you're not too worried about spot removal because you've already gotten something out of them. If your deck is all crazy board dominating monsters like Baneslayer, then you can eventually exhaust your opponent's spot removal, and the last Baneslayer you get down that he can't answer is the one that's going to win you the game. If you mix the two, then he can ignore the Muldrifters and kill the Baneslayers, and you never exhaust his removal, and so it's much less effective. But unfortunately, in Legacy Tribal Wars, it's very difficult, although there are some decks that can do it. Not every tribe has the ability to either just send an unendless stream of monsters at the guy or have a bunch of totally awesome sweet value cards like Muldrifter. So one of the things we're going to look at is creatures that you could be playing that will at least get around some of these spot removal. Now, the list of most commonly played spells in Legacy Tribal Wars includes only 6 which have some sort of resistance to removal in the top 250, which is Mirran Crusader, whose colors aren't really that great that he has protection from anyways. Mother of Runes, which can give herself or another creature protection from anything. Very solid if it doesn't immediately get killed, which is probably what's going to happen. Geist of St. Traft, which I think is right now only being held back because of price while it's in standard. If it comes down a little bit, I think it's going to see more play. Mystic Crusader and Mystic Enforcer. Mystic Crusader has protection from red and black. Mystic Enforcer from black. Those are good, and if you have Threshold, both of those are respectable creatures. Meddling Mage kind of has protection because if you know what's in their hand, you could name the removal spell, but it's still just a bear at that point, so it's not all that impressive. But that's it in the top 250. Almost no awareness of people trying to play around these Sword Splashers and Lightning Bolt is the most commonly played spells in the format. So let's take a look at some creatures that do get around those and see if one of these might fit the tribe or the deck that you're building. Let's start with Shroud. Now, of course, Shroud is popular in reanimation targets because you don't want to put all that work into a creature just to immediately have it die. You can also use an enchantment such as Steely Resolve and just give your entire tribe Shroud. Sphinx of Jwar Isle was a very respectable finisher for a little while in Standard. The Centaurs actually have a sort of Shroud sub-theme in them. These 3 guys all have Shroud and not horrible bodies. Certainly this guy with Threshold is a 5/6 Shroud that can get Trample. You definitely want to think about, if you're putting a lot of mana into a Shroud guy, having some sort of evasion so they can't just chump block the thing. Rogues are pretty good for Shroud. Mongooses, surprisingly, Nimble Mongoose is the one Shroud creature that really tears it up in regular Legacy, but no one wants to play Mongooses, probably because the other 2 aren't that great. But he's around. Kadama of the North Tree, Shroud and Trample, so again, good combination. There are actually a lot of these insects with high power, low toughness that have Shroud as well. Most of them aren't competitively costed. Giant Solifuge is probably the best. Crystalline Sliver gives all of your slivers, including itself, Shroud, which when we were talking in my archetype series about linear aggro decks and these decks that need the synergies between all their creatures, Slivers is one of those. But Slivers has the advantage that they can give all their guys Shroud, which most of the other ones don't. Certainly not as easy as Crystal and Sliver. And because that's a type of deck that relies on having synergies between a bunch of creatures, spot removal is especially effective against it. And so it's kind of surprising that Slivers haven't been seen as much, since they seem like they would be in a vacuum probably like the best linear aggro deck, or aggro control, depending on how you build them. But Crystal and Sliver is out there, and remember that that could be one answer to the current sort of state of this format. Hexproof is the sort of older, or the new brother, the younger brother to Shroud. Dungrove Elder, Geist of St. Traft, Invisible Stalker, Great Sword Carrier. Lord of the Unreal, if you have 2 of them, or you can get a Phantasmal Image out, can make all of your illusions, including himself if you can double up, have Hexproof. The Phantasmal Image copying him is what will do that, because then it gets Hexproof as well. Sigarda also blanks Edict effects. We have Troll Ascetic and Thrun, both of which are good equipment carriers and can regenerate through sweepers, although unfortunately Rat the God is the most popular one of those. Ural the Miststalker, I would love to see a deck someday built around this guy. I have no idea how to even begin on that, but he does have hexproof, so feel free to slap some auras on that dude. Now we will look at protection from red. Burnt and Forge Tender still sees play in some Kithkin lists. Core Firewalker is basically just a bear if your opponent isn't playing red, but if your opponent is playing red, he's an absolute nightmare for your opponent to deal with. Not to mention the fact that he's in Core, which is one of the 2 tribes that is still allowed in the event to play Stoneforge Mystic, so he can always just carry a sword in a pinch. Phyrexian Crusader poses a bit of a challenge. He's very difficult to tangle with in combat, and he has protection from both red and from white. So this guy is an absolute beast. The problem is, of course, figuring out something to do about the fact that he has Infect and finding enough legacy playable zombies or knights to go around him. You really don't have enough in knights. You'd have to probably go zombies if you wanted all your guys to have Infect in order to not be sort of the classic Infect problem of trying to kill them twice both ways. But if somebody could crack that puzzle, this guy would be an absolute house compared to the current state of spot removal in this format. Silver Knight, of course, sort of a White Knight variant for red. Paladin Envec adds protection from black, but I don't think quite gets there with the extra 1 mana that he costs. Mystic Crusader, however, I do think does. If you have a deck that can reliably get to Threshold, it becomes a 3/2 flyer with protection from black and red, which I think does still get there. Of course, you can always, if you want to avoid Lightning Bolt, play a creature with toughness greater than 3. But, those don't seem to be all that popular for some reason. Is this format just addicted to weenie strategies? Anyways, moving on. Trying to find creatures with protection from white that will get around Swords to Plowshares. We have a Chroma, sort of one of your biggest creatures with that ability, and she is one of the only legendary creatures you can bring back with, say, Loyal Retainers that doesn't just instantly die to Swords to Plowshares. So if you're looking at that kind of build, you might want to consider a Chroma. She doesn't have haste. She might take a little too long to close out the game if you don't have a way to generate some red mana, but she is an option. There have been a bunch of Black Knight variants over the years, many of which are competitive. Hand of Cruelty, pretty tough to tangle with. Knight of Infamy, very popular currently in red-black aggro lists and Standard. The old standby from Fallen Empires, the Pump Knights, and of course the classic Black Knight from Alpha. Blood Knight, you have the Planar Chaos version, so that's red with protection from white. Not quite sure what you would do with Crypt Angel, but she has a decent flying body with protection from white. If you had a way to splash her to something, because I don't think you're going to do it in Angels, but if you had a way to splash her to something to get some value out of that, you could certainly consider it. This one probably doesn't get there, but it does have Flash, so I will include it as an idea. You may have some kind of deck that might be able to take advantage of this because of the Flash. Goblin Wizard, I wonder if people even remember about. Because you don't see it in a lot of Goblin decks. It was originally printed in the dark and then reprinted online in Masters Edition. It has both sort of an Aether Vial effect here, unlimited in range, as you put any Goblin out, and it can give any Goblin protection from white, including itself, for 1 red mana. So Goblins, if you're wanting your Goblin list to have some resistance to white removal, this guy, for that reason and more, an excellent choice. But again, for some reason, doesn't see a lot of play. Goblins has been very Sly style in a lot of their builds, very swarmy, white weenie almost style, and not so much the sort of utility or synergistic Goblins. So maybe that's why, I don't know, but again, great. Malakir Blood Witch is a card that I really like. There was a little while in Standard where basically nothing killed this, where after Alara rotated out, you had Lightning Bolt and Doomblade as the sort of primary kill spells, neither of which got Malakir Blood Witch once Terminate had rotated out. So this one still, of course, blanks Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, and Swords to Plowshares in the current format, and Vampire and Shaman are both popular tribes, so Malakir Blood Witch, something that I think could see play in Legacy Tribal Wars and probably should see more play. Very good evasive body on it as well. Stillmoon Cavalier can have a nice big evasive body if you want to pump a bunch of mana into it, protection from white and black, which is nice as a bonus. Wildfire Emissary, basically known from the moment it was printed as the creature that doesn't die to Lightning Bolt or Swords to Plowshares, Plowshares. It does take a lot of mana to get this thing going, and you may or may not like Efreets as much as I do. So that's probably the drawback to this guy, but he is around. And Animar Soul of the Elements from the Commander precons has protection from both white and black, and with a little bit of work you could get him out of bolt range. I'm not sure what kind of deck in Elementals could make use out of this thing, but it's an interesting challenge that you might look for. So anyways, there's a whole bunch of potentially playable creatures in this list here, and it's just very surprising that you don't see more people making an effort in deck construction to play some creatures that are resistant to the popularly played removal spells of the format. It's just strange that to the extent that the tribes that people have chosen to play have clearly shaped the type of removal this plays. Swords and Lightning Bolt are just super efficient, but things like Punishing Fire being so awesome in this format, clearly a factor of the type of creatures that are played. Yet there hasn't been any sort of pushback from the aggro players to retool the kind of creatures that they're using in their deck in order to make that spot removal less good against them. So it'll be interesting to see going forward if things will change. I suspect probably they won't, personally, but if you're aware of the issue and you want to kind of treat it as a deck building challenge, there are definitely things you can do. So anyways, thank you for joining me this week.